The wind cut through the prairie like a jagged knife, whipping snow and loose dirt across the barren landscape. The sky was a dull, steel gray, promising more cold than warmth, and the sun was little more than a faint, ghostly glow behind the clouds. In the midst of this unforgiving expanse, a small, fragile bundle lay motionless in the snow, a girl, no older than 12, wrapped tightly in a rough burlap sack. Her limbs were crumpled inside, and every breath was a visible puff of frost. The world had abandoned her, and now her own family had done the same, leaving her for death in the desolate winter wasteland. She struggled to make sense of the world around her, her small, brown eyes blinking through tears and frost. The memories of her home were fragmented and painful. She remembered warmth once, the warmth of her mother's arms and the smell of stew bubbling over an open fire, but those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime. Her father, if she could call him that, had turned his back. Her brothers and sisters had mocked her weakness, and now, with the cruel, final act of tossing her into the snow-filled sack, her family had erased her existence from their lives. She shivered violently, the cold biting her skin like needles, and tried to move, but the sack constricted her, making even a single twitch feel impossible. Fear gnawed at her stomach, twisting it into tight knots. The loneliness pressed down harder than the snow above her. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper threats, the prairie itself a living, uncaring entity ready to swallow her whole. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold, and her hands, tucked inside the sack, were stiff and numb. Every heartbeat felt precarious, fragile, a ticking clock counting down her last moments in a world that had forgotten her. She pressed her face against the rough burlap, trying to shelter herself from the elements, murmuring silent pleas to any spirit or deity that might listen. Memories of her mother surfaced like shards of broken glass, sharp yet comforting. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, the soft lullabies at night, and the stories that painted the world with color and hope. Her mother had died when she was very young, leaving a void that her father and siblings never attempted to fill. Now, with her abandonment, that void had widened, threatening to engulf her entirely. The girl's mind wandered in fleeting daydreams of being rescued, of finding kindness in the world. But reality always pressed back. She was alone, freezing, and entirely at the mercy of fate. Her small chest heaved with each shivering breath. The prairie was silent except for the wind, which carried distant, haunting echoes of coyotes howling and the rustling of skeletal grass. She imagined her own death creeping closer with every minute, the snow blending with her tears, the cold seeping into her bones until it would become indistinguishable from her heartbeat. Yet, despite the terror, a faint ember of defiance burned within her. She would not give up without a fight. Somewhere deep inside, a memory of her mother's strength whispered to her, "Survive, even when the world has turned its back." Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, she could not tell, and her consciousness began to ebb in and out. The biting cold threatened to pull her into unconsciousness, but instinctively, she twisted inside the sack, shivering violently, fighting against the pull of the snow that sought to claim her. Her small voice, hoarse and trembling, finally managed a soft, desperate cry, the sound nearly swallowed by the wind. "Please, someone." It was a cry of fear, of pain, of abandonment, but also of hope. Somewhere beyond the barren horizon, beyond the howling winds and endless snow, she still believed there might be someone who would see her, hear her, and save her from the cold embrace of death. That fragile belief, the smallest, most stubborn flicker of hope, was the only thing keeping her alive. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast expanse of white and brown under the pale gray sky. The wind still cut sharply, carrying with it a chill that gnawed at exposed skin and made the sparse grasses dance like ghosts. Amid this desolate land, a lone figure rode steadily on horseback, a rugged cowboy with a weathered hat pulled low over his brow, a coat dusted with snow, and boots caked with mud from weeks of travel across the ranch. He was accustomed to the solitude of the open plains, attuned to the subtle movements of the land, the faint rustle of wind through grass, the distant calls of wildlife. But today, something unusual reached his ears, a faint, almost imperceptible whimper carried and distorted by the wind. At first, he paused, scanning the horizon. It could have been the wind playing tricks or an animal in distress. But no, there it was again, a soft, trembling sound that made his chest tighten with unease. He urged his horse forward, eyes narrowing, heart quickening. The sound grew clearer, more desperate, and he realized it was human, a child, alone and in danger. With careful steps, he guided his horse across the uneven ground, snow crunching beneath hooves, until the source became painfully clear. There, partially buried in the snow, lay a small burlap sack. His experienced eyes immediately recognized the telltale signs of someone attempting to conceal a body or abandon it. He spurred his horse closer and dismounted swiftly, boots sinking into the snow. Kneeling beside the bundle, he carefully reached inside. The sack was wet and stiff with frost, and as he lifted the trembling child from its confines, he felt the shocking lightness of her small, fragile body. Her skin was icy, her lips blue, and her eyes fluttered weakly, barely opening to meet his gaze. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The cowboy assessed her quickly, instincts kicking in. She was alive, but barely. He could see the fear etched into her delicate features, the way her tiny hands clutched at the sack as if it were a shield against the world. His heart tightened with a mix of sorrow and anger. Who could do such a thing? Who could abandon a child to the elements, leaving her to die alone in the prairie? Without hesitation, he lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest. The warmth of his coat began to seep into her frozen body, though she remained shivering violently. "It's okay, little one," he murmured softly, his voice steady and reassuring, even as rage simmered beneath the surface. "You're safe now. I've got you." The girl's eyes flickered weakly, trying to focus on the stranger holding her. There was fear, yes, but also a tiny spark of recognition, a faint instinct that she might have found someone who would protect her. He mounted his horse again, balancing her carefully across the saddle in his arms, and started the ride back to his ranch. The wind still bit at their faces, but with every movement, he could feel her small body slowly relaxing, her trembling lessening as warmth began to return. Every few minutes, he spoke softly, telling her she was safe, that she wouldn't be alone anymore, that no one would hurt her again. As they approached the distant outline of his home, smoke curling from the chimney, he felt a sense of responsibility settle over him, heavier than the pack of supplies on his horse or the weight of the winter cold. This child, abandoned and forsaken, was now in his care. He didn't know what her past held or what pain she had endured, but one thing was certain: she would not be left to the cold again. Somewhere inside him, a protective determination burned, a promise unspoken yet resolute. He would ensure she survived, no matter what the prairie or the past tried to throw at her. Inside the warm wooden walls of the cowboy's home, the air smelled of firewood and fresh bread, a comforting contrast to the biting cold of the prairie outside. The girl, still trembling and pale from her ordeal, was wrapped in thick blankets and settled near the fireplace. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in unfamiliar sights, the soft flicker of the firelight on the walls, The neat rows of dishes on the shelves, the cozy nooks filled with warmth and safety. She had never known a home like this, never felt the quiet security that came with a loving household. Even so, she remained cautious, her instincts telling her to stay alert, to trust no one fully. From the doorway, a small, inquisitive figure watched her silently. The cowboy's daughter, a girl no older than 10, stepped softly into the room, her boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Her eyes were wide with curiosity and concern, her hands clasped together as she observed the stranger curled in blankets. There was something about the girl in the sack that captured her attention, something fragile yet resilient. She could sense the fear in her eyes, the hesitation in her movements, and it tugged at her heart. The young daughter took a few cautious steps forward, then paused, thinking carefully about how to approach. She had always been perceptive, able to see what others often missed. And now she sensed a story hidden behind those cautious eyes, a history of pain and loss that the girl hadn't yet shared. Without fully understanding why, she felt drawn to her, compelled to offer comfort and friendship. "Hi," she whispered softly, careful not to startle her. The girl's head lifted slightly, but she didn't respond. Her body remained tense, her small frame curled protectively within the blankets. The daughter knelt a few feet away, keeping her distance yet closing enough to show kindness. I'm Emma," she said, introducing herself in a gentle voice. "This is my home. You don't have to be scared." Her words were simple, but they carried an unusual weight of empathy and understanding. The girl in the blankets watched her warily, unsure whether to trust, unsure if this was another trap like the one she had endured outside. Yet Emma's eyes were steady, patient, and honest, qualities the girl recognized from somewhere deep within herself. For a long while, there was silence. The girl didn't speak, only listened to the crackle of the fire and the soft voice of the child before her. Gradually, something shifted, a faint flicker of curiosity, a hesitant interest. She lifted a trembling hand and brushed it against the blanket covering her knees, then slowly let it fall again. Emma noticed the subtle gesture and smiled softly, a warmth that seemed to pierce through the girl's armor of fear. "Do you like stories?" Emma asked, tilting her head slightly. The girl's eyes widened, intrigued despite herself. She had always loved stories, especially ones her mother had told her, tales of strength, courage, and magic that made the world seem bigger than her pain. Emma smiled wider, sensing the tiny spark of connection. "I can tell you stories. Or you can tell me about yourself. Only if you want to, of course," she added gently. The girl hesitated, her heart pounding, memories of betrayal and abandonment flooding her mind. But something about Emma's presence, her innocence, her empathy, made her want to try. She gave a tiny nod, almost imperceptible, a quiet signal that she might begin to trust again. Watching her closely, Emma whispered, almost to herself, "Papa's going to love you too. You'll be safe here." The words carried a promise, one that the young girl couldn't yet fully believe, but deep inside, a seed of hope began to take root. For the first time since being abandoned, she felt the faint possibility that perhaps not all people would betray her. That maybe, just maybe, this home could become a sanctuary, a place where she could learn to breathe freely again. The first few days in the cowboy's home were a delicate balance between fear and comfort for the girl. Every sound, the creak of the wooden floors, the low murmur of the fireplace, the occasional clatter of dishes made her flinch, reminders of how easily a life could be turned upside down. Yet, amid these moments of instinctive caution, there were others filled with warmth and gentle care. The cowboy's daughter, Emma, never left her side, offering small gestures of reassurance, a cup of warm milk, a soft blanket, or simply sitting nearby and speaking in a calm, soothing voice. Slowly, the girl began to sense that these people were different from those who had abandoned her. The cowboy himself was a quiet, steady presence. He came and went, tending to the ranch, but never too far from the girl's recovery. His hands, rough from years of labor, were gentle when he checked her for frostbite and bruises. He provided nourishment, warmth, and the medicine necessary to heal her injuries, all without pressing her to speak of her past before she was ready. Each act, though simple, was a lifeline, a demonstration that someone could care without expecting anything in return. The girl, accustomed to cruelty and indifference, was initially suspicious, her trust fragile and easily broken. But with each passing day, the small gestures accumulated, building a bridge she had long thought impossible. Emma took it upon herself to help the girl regain not only her strength, but also her sense of dignity. She would bring her small tasks to complete, arranging firewood, folding freshly washed linens, or helping to stir the stew. These activities were meant to teach, to distract, and most importantly, to give the girl a sense of purpose, a feeling that she mattered. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she had the right or the strength to participate, but Emma's patience and encouragement gradually coaxed her into small victories. Each successful task, no matter how minor, was a step away from the helplessness of the snow-covered prairie and toward a life where she could feel capable and alive. In the quiet evenings, Emma would sit beside her, sharing stories of the ranch, of their animals, and the people who worked the land. The girl listened, sometimes responding with shy nods or tentative words. Slowly, she began to reveal fragments of her life, her mother's lullabies, the harsh words of her family, and the moments when survival seemed impossible. Sharing these memories was both terrifying and liberating. In the safety of the cabin, she could finally voice her fears without the looming threat of judgment or cruelty. Emma's responses were always gentle, never pushing, simply offering comfort and understanding. The girl's nights were no longer filled solely with shivering terror. The blankets, the fire, and the quiet vigilance of Emma and her father gave her the rare gift of rest. Sleep returned, bringing with it dreams that weren't haunted by snow and darkness, but instead flickered with warmth, laughter, and hope. Each morning, she woke to the sun's pale glow filtering through the window, a gentle reminder that the world could hold safety as well as danger. With her body regaining strength, her spirit also began to heal. The fear that had once consumed her started to ease, replaced by cautious curiosity and the budding trust in those around her. The small acts of kindness, the cup of hot tea, the soft smile, the story shared by the fire were more than comfort. They were the foundations of belonging. For the first time since being abandoned, she could imagine a life where she was more than a burden, more than a forgotten child in the snow. By the end of her first week in the cabin, she could move more freely, speak in complete sentences, and even laugh quietly at Emma's playful antics. Though her heart still carried the weight of past trauma, the warmth of the Cowboy's family was slowly melting the ice that had formed around it. In the gentle rhythm of daily life meals, chores, and shared stories, the girl began to realize that survival was no longer just about enduring. It was about living. About finding connection and hope in a world she had once thought would never care for her. As the girl grew stronger and more comfortable in the warmth of the Cowboy's home, her presence became a quiet rhythm in the household. Yet, the shadows of her past lingered, unspoken but heavy, like a dark cloud hovering just beyond the firelight. The Cowboy and his daughter Emma noticed the moments when her eyes would glaze over, staring into nothing, as though reliving painful memories she could not yet voice. It became clear that understanding her past was essential, not just for her recovery, but for her future in their care. One afternoon, while the girl helped Emma arrange freshly laundered clothes, the conversation began slowly, almost accidentally. Emma, sensing a quiet hesitation in the girl's movements, asked gently, "Did you live far from here before?" The girl froze, hands stilling mid-motion, and for a moment her silence seemed impenetrable. Then, in the softest voice, she began to whisper fragments of her story. She spoke of a small village to the west, of a home where love had existed but had been fleeting, and of a family that had slowly grown cruel with time. She spoke of her mother first, her warmth, her laughter, the lullabies that had once soothed her fears. The memory seemed both comforting and agonizing, a reminder of what had been lost. Her father, she said, had become distant and harsh after her mother's death, turning his attention to his older children while leaving her to fend for herself. She described the ridicule and neglect she endured, the small humiliations that compounded into a profound sense of worthlessness. Each word she spoke trembled with the weight of betrayal and pain, yet there was a quiet resilience in her voice, a determination not to let the past completely define her. The cowboy listened quietly as the girl recounted the final act of cruelty, the moment she had been placed in the sack and abandoned in the prairie. His hands clenched involuntarily at his sides, his jaw tightening as he pictured the scene. A small, helpless child left to the merciless winter, her life dangling by a thread. The anger he felt was tempered by admiration for her survival. She had endured what most could not, and yet here she was, alive, standing before him, beginning to reclaim her life. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent, offering only gentle gestures of support. She understood the courage it took for the girl to speak of these experiences aloud, recognizing that this act of vulnerability was as significant as any physical healing. Each detail shared, the neglect, the fear, the abandonment, was a piece of the puzzle that explained why the girl was so wary, so guarded, and yet so fiercely alive. The girl's story also revealed her cultural heritage, the customs and traditions that shaped her identity. She spoke of ceremonies, of songs passed down from her mother, of lessons in survival and respect for the land that her people had practiced for generations. These were treasures she had carried silently, often hidden, yet they were now coming to light, weaving a richer tapestry of her identity beyond the trauma she had endured. The cowboy and Emma listened with reverence, realizing that understanding these roots was key to helping her feel truly at home. By the evening, the conversation had deepened into a quiet sharing of fears, hopes, and fragments of the past. The girl, exhausted but relieved, felt a sense of release in finally speaking her truth. The cowboy, moved by her courage, silently vowed to protect not just her life, but her dignity and heritage as well. Emma, sensing the strength and spirit within this young survivor, whispered softly as she tucked the girl in that night, "You're safe here. We'll help you carry all of this with you." For the girl, unveiling her past was not just an act of remembering, it was a step toward reclaiming her identity. The trauma, once overwhelming, began to take its place alongside resilience, strength, and the first hints of hope. In the warmth of the cabin, surrounded by the cowboy and his daughter, she began to realize that her story was no longer solely defined by abandonment and fear. It was becoming a story of survival, connection, and the possibility of a family that truly cared for her. Days and weeks passed, and the once fragile, wary girl began to settle into the rhythms of life on the ranch. Her body had regained strength, but it was her spirit that was slowly coming alive, nurtured by the warmth, patience, and care of the cowboy's family. Among all the bonds she was forming, none was as significant as the one with Emma, the cowboy's daughter. Their friendship began with small, tentative interactions, shared meals, quiet conversation by the fire, and cautious play, but gradually grew into something deeper, a profound trust built on patience, empathy, and shared experience. Emma had an uncanny ability to sense when the girl needed space and when she needed companionship. She never forced conversation, never pressed her to reveal her past, and never judged her for the fears and anxieties she carried. Instead, she approached her with the simplicity and honesty only a child could muster. "Do you want to help me feed the chickens?" Emma would ask on some mornings, and the girl, still uncertain but slowly gaining confidence, would nod and follow. Together they moved through the chores, laughter beginning to pierce the once heavy silence of the girl's world. The girl, in turn, began to open up in ways she hadn't thought possible. She told Emma stories of her mother, of the songs she used to sing, and the lessons in survival her family had passed down. In doing so, she reclaimed parts of herself that she had buried in fear and trauma. Emma listened intently, her wide eyes reflecting admiration, empathy, and wonder. She learned about the girl's traditions, her rituals, and her quiet resilience, and through these stories, she grew to see the girl not merely as a survivor of cruelty, but as a person rich in wisdom, spirit, and courage. The bond between them deepened further through shared adventures. They explored the edges of the ranch together, climbing rocks, following trails, and discovering the hidden beauty of the prairie. Each new discovery, wildflowers pushing through the snow, the soft tracks of rabbits in the frost, the distant cry of hawks circling overhead, became a shared moment of joy and connection. The girl began to feel a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Emma's companionship transformed the ranch from a place of mere safety into a world of possibility and wonder, where laughter and trust were not punishable sins but natural parts of life. Nights were particularly significant for their growing friendship. Sitting by the fire, wrapped in blankets, Emma would ask the girl to share stories she hadn't told anyone before. At first, the girl hesitated, fearing judgment or rejection, but Emma's gentle presence encouraged her to speak. She recounted moments of fear, of abandonment, and of the small victories that had kept her alive. Each story shared became a bridge connecting her past with the present, and slowly she began to feel that her experiences did not define her entirely. They were parts of a larger, more complex identity that could coexist with hope and love. Even the cowboy noticed the transformation. He watched as his daughter and the girl laughed together over minor mishaps, as they shared quiet secrets, and as they supported one another through moments of fear or hesitation. The bond was not only healing for the girl, it also filled a part of Emma's heart, teaching her empathy, courage, and the importance of steadfast loyalty. Over time, the girl's guardedness softened, replaced by the comfort of trust. Emma became her anchor, a source of stability in a world that had so often been chaotic and cruel. She learned the subtle language of friendship, the glances that reassured, the gentle touch that comforted, and the quiet words that promised safety. With Emma, she could begin to imagine a life where she was loved, not feared, and where she could be herself without reservation. By the end of this period, their bond had evolved beyond companionship. It was a sisterly, almost familial connection, one that gave the girl courage to envision a future she had never dared to imagine. In the warmth of the cabin and the open spaces of the ranch, she was no longer defined by abandonment or fear. She was defined by trust, love, and the promise of a new life unfolding beside a child who had become her closest friend, and soon, something even more profound. The peaceful rhythm of life on the ranch began to feel almost normal, a comforting routine that the girl had never imagined possible. She helped Emma with chores, tended to small animals, and even began to teach Emma some of the survival skills and stories her mother had once shared with her. Yet, beneath the warmth and laughter, a shadow lingered, an unseen tension that whispered warnings in the wind. The girl's past, long buried under blankets of snow and silence, had not forgotten her. It began with subtle signs. Distant strangers spotted on the outskirts of the property, the occasional disappearance of livestock, and tracks in the dust that suggested more than wild animals roamed nearby. At first, the cowboy dismissed them as routine threats common to life on the prairie. Yet the girl's instincts, honed from years of abandonment and danger, recognized the danger immediately. Her heart raced each time she noticed someone lurking too long near the edges of the land, each time the wind carried the faintest echo of voices speaking in hushed tones. She could feel it, the presence of those who had once turned their backs on her, now seeking to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. One evening, as the sky bled into shades of orange and purple, a rider appeared on the horizon, a distant silhouette growing larger with each passing moment. The cowboy's trained eyes immediately assessed the figure. There was something purposeful in the way the horse moved, deliberate and confident. His chest tightened. He realized these were not wandering travelers or hunters. They were searching for something, or someone. His mind raced as he considered the girl's story, the cruelty of those who had abandoned her, and the likelihood that they would come for her now, motivated by greed, pride, or revenge. Inside the cabin, the girl felt a familiar tension rise in her chest, the icy fingers of fear curling around her heart. She knew, with a certainty that came from survival, that these people would stop at nothing. She whispered her concerns to Emma, her voice trembling. "They're coming. They want me back. They'll take me if they can." Emma's eyes widened, but she did not panic. Instead, she clutched the girl's hand, grounding her, silently promising that she would not face this threat alone. The cowboy, alerted by the girl's warning, immediately prepared the ranch for defense. Gates were secured, livestock moved to safer areas, and trusted hands were sent to watch the perimeter. He checked weapons, barricaded vulnerable areas, and laid plans to protect not only his property, but the girl who had come to mean so much to his family. Yet even with preparations, he understood that this confrontation would test more than just physical strength. It would test trust, courage, and the resolve of the girl herself. Over the next few days, tension hung over the ranch like a storm cloud. Every movement outside was scrutinized, every shadow questioned. The girl found herself reliving memories of betrayal, her pulse quickening at every unexpected sound. Yet she also discovered a growing courage within herself, drawn from the care she had received from Emma and the cowboy. She realized that she no longer needed to face danger as she once had alone, terrified and defenseless. Now she had allies, family, and a home worth protecting. Despite the looming threat, moments of tenderness still emerged. Emma continued to offer small acts of comfort, holding the girl's hand during quiet times by the fire, sharing whispered reassurances, and keeping her laughter alive even amid fear. These moments reinforced the girl's growing understanding that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it with support and trust. As the strangers approached, tension reached its peak. The prairie, which had once felt like a vast empty expanse, now seemed charged with imminent danger. The girl, once abandoned and defenseless, now stood prepared, not just physically, but emotionally, ready to confront the past and protect the fragile life she had begun to rebuild. In the quiet, the wind seemed to whisper both threat and promise. Danger was near, but so was the strength she had never known she possessed. The morning air was crisp, sharp with the promise of confrontation. The girl stood near the edge of the ranch, wrapped in a thick coat, her breath forming small clouds in the chill. Her eyes, once wide with fear and uncertainty, now held a quiet determination. The strangers who had abandoned her, who had cast her into the snow and left her for dead, had come seeking her once more. But this time she would not be helpless. This time she would meet them not as a frightened child, but as someone who had found strength, allies, and a home worth defending. The cowboy watched from a distance, his broad shoulders tense but calm. He had prepared the ranch, fortified its vulnerable points, and called trusted men to stand ready if violence erupted. Yet he understood that the true test was not in the strength of his arms or the sharpness of his rifle. It lay in the courage of the girl herself. She had survived the cruelty of her past through instinct and endurance. Now she would face it with defiance, claiming the life and identity that had been denied to her. The strangers approached, their horses kicking up clouds of dust and snow. They bore the arrogance of entitlement, assuming the girl was still the powerless child they once discarded. As they drew closer, she stepped forward, her small frame seemingly fragile, yet radiating a courage that belied her size. Her voice, steady and unwavering despite the tremor of nerves, carried across the open prairie. "I am not yours," she declared. "I am not who you think I am. I belong to myself now." A tense silence fell over the approaching group. They had expected fear, compliance, and hesitation. Instead, they were met with defiance, eyes blazing with the fire of someone who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger. The girl took another step forward, unafraid to meet their gaze, letting them see the resilience that had been forged through hardship and nurtured by the warmth of the cowboy's family. Emma and the cowboy stood nearby, a silent support, their presence lending unspoken power to the girl's courage. Emma's small hand brushed against hers, grounding her, while the cowboy's steady stare reassured her that she was not alone. This unity gave her confidence, the realization that she did not have to face danger alone, that strength could come from love and loyalty, not just survival instinct. The strangers attempted to assert dominance, speaking harshly, trying to intimidate her into submission. But the girl, with a voice now firm and resolute, refused to waver. "I will not go back," she said. "You abandoned me once, but I am not the same girl you left behind. You have no power over me now." Her words cut through the cold air, and the arrogance of her pursuers faltered under the unexpected force of her defiance. The confrontation was brief, not because the girl backed down, but because her strength, bolstered by her allies, rendered their threats meaningless. The cowboy's protective presence and the girl's newfound courage created an unyielding barrier. The strangers realized that their attempts to reclaim her were futile. They could no longer see her as powerless, nor could they undo the bond she had forged with those who genuinely cared for her. As they finally turned away, defeated, the girl stood tall, her chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline. She had faced the ghosts of her past and declared, without compromise, that she was no longer theirs to control. The prairie, once a place of abandonment and fear, now bore witness to her transformation. The girl, once fragile and forsaken, had become resilient, fierce, and unbreakable, claiming her own destiny and asserting her right to a life defined not by cruelty, but by love, choice, and courage. That evening, as she returned to the warmth of the cabin, Emma ran to her side, wrapping her in a hug. The cowboy followed, placing a hand on her shoulder, proud and relieved. Together they celebrated not just survival but defiance, the girl's bold declaration of agency, her refusal to be defined by those who had tried to destroy her, and the power of family trust and courage to transform even the coldest, harshest experiences into triumph. The evening sun cast long golden shadows across the ranch, painting the world in hues of warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the harsh memories that had once dominated the girl's life. The confrontation with her past was over. The strangers had retreated, defeated by her courage and the unwavering protection of the cowboy and his daughter. Yet, amidst the calm that settled over the prairie, a different kind of revelation was about to unfold, one that would shape the emotional core of the girl's new life. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was quiet, almost sacred. The fire crackled softly, illuminating the worn wooden walls and casting flickering light over the girl's face. She sat near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline and relief of the day. Emma sat opposite her, eyes wide with admiration and something deeper, a recognition of the strength and spirit that radiated from the girl. The cowboy watched from a nearby chair, his presence solid, protective, but allowing this intimate moment to unfold without intrusion. Emma had been observing the girl since the moment she arrived at the ranch, noticing how she nurtured the land, cared for the animals, and gradually transformed from a frightened, abandoned child into a resilient young woman. There was something in her, an innate kindness, courage, and tenderness that reminded Emma of her own mother, who had passed away when she was very young. Emma's heart ached with the longing for the mother she had barely known, and yet she could see that same warmth reflected in this girl before her. As she studied her, Emma leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, "Papa." "She's Mama." The words were soft, almost trembling, yet filled with certainty. The cowboy's head turned slowly, eyes meeting hers in silent understanding. He had known the girl had become a maternal figure for Emma, but hearing his daughter articulate it so clearly struck him with profound clarity. In that moment, the girl was no longer just a survivor, no longer simply a guest in their home. She was family, a living embodiment of love, care, and the maternal presence Emma had been longing for. The girl looked up, startled at first, unsure if she had heard correctly. The vulnerability in Emma's eyes, the truth in her voice, was undeniable. A rush of emotions flooded her: shock, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of belonging she had never thought possible. Tears welled up unbidden as she realized that she had found a home not just in the physical sense, but in the hearts of those who truly cared for her. She had endured abandonment and cruelty, yet here, in this small, fire-lit room, she was recognized, valued, and cherished. The cowboy spoke then, his deep voice gentle but steady, affirming the truth that had always been present. "She is, Emma. She's part of our family. She's here to stay." His words reinforced the revelation, giving it permanence and weight. The girl felt the barriers she had spent years building around her heart begin to crumble, replaced by the warm certainty of acceptance and love. Emma reached out, taking the girl's hand in hers, and the simple act spoke volumes. No words were needed to express the depth of trust and affection between them. In that moment, the girl understood that she was no longer defined by her past, the abandonment, the fear, the cold nights alone in the prairie, but by the family she had earned through resilience, courage, and the bonds she had nurtured. As the fire crackled and the night settled over the ranch, a new chapter began. The girl's journey from abandoned child to maternal figure was complete in its own quiet way. She had found her place, not just as a survivor, but as a source of love and care, recognized and cherished by those who mattered most. In the soft glow of the hearth, the whisper, "Papa, she's Mama," became a declaration of belonging, a promise of enduring family, and a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The morning sun filtered through the cabin windows, casting a gentle glow across the room. The air smelled of fresh hay, bread baking in the oven, and the lingering scent of pine from the nearby forest. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, brilliant and alive in the soft light, a world that once seemed so harsh and unforgiving now brimming with possibility. For the girl, each new day carried the quiet joy of belonging, a feeling so profound that it seemed almost foreign to her at first. She had survived abandonment, cruelty, and the freezing prairie, and now she was home, truly home, in a place where love and family were not conditional, but given freely. Emma was the first to greet her, rushing into the cabin with a bright smile, her small hands outstretched. "Come on. Papa's making breakfast," she called, her voice bubbling with the innocence and excitement of a child who felt safe, loved, and protected. The girl, wrapped in a warm shawl, returned the smile, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. She followed Emma into the kitchen, where the cowboy was already bustling about, frying eggs and stirring a pot of porridge. The scene was ordinary, yet extraordinary, a simple domestic moment that for the girl symbolized stability, care, and the promise of a life free from fear. As they ate together, the girl felt a sense of normalcy she had never experienced before. Conversations flowed freely, laughter punctuated the quiet clinks of dishes, and even small disagreements over who should wash the plates ended in giggles rather than punishment or anger. She realized that she had been given something far more valuable than mere survival, a chance to be a part of something bigger than herself, a family that saw her worth and embraced it wholeheartedly. In the days that followed, the girl became more than just a guest in the household. She became a motherly presence to Emma. She helped with chores, guided the young girl in small tasks, and shared stories of courage and resilience that inspired both respect and admiration. Emma's admiration was evident in her eyes, her quiet moments of reflection, and the way she leaned into the girl for comfort or advice. It was a reciprocal bond. The girl, once so lonely and abandoned, discovered a purpose in nurturing, teaching, and loving, a role she had never imagined she could fulfill. The cowboy watched them closely, pride swelling quietly in his chest. He had found the girl in the coldest, most desperate place imaginable, and now he saw her fully transformed, strong, caring, and deeply connected to his daughter. The bond between the two girls was not just friendship, it was familial, maternal, and enduring. In her, Emma had found the mother she had lost, and in the girl herself had discovered a family that valued her not for what she could do, but for who she was. The ranch became a sanctuary not just for the girl, but for all of them. They worked together, laughed together, and faced the challenges of prairie life as a united family. The girl taught Emma survival skills she had learned in her past, blending them with the cowboy's practical wisdom. In return, she learned patience, compassion, and the simple joys of domestic life, the pleasure of a well-cooked meal, the warmth of a fire after a long day, and the satisfaction of a home built on love rather than fear. Over time, the girl's traumatic past became a story of resilience rather than despair. The nights of cold, fear, and abandonment were replaced with evenings by the hearth, the glow of the fire reflecting on faces full of trust, hope, and affection. The prairie that had once seemed endless and merciless was now a landscape of life, growth, and possibility. One quiet evening, as the girl tucked Emma into bed, she paused to watch the stars glimmer above the open plains. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. She had found a place where she belonged, a family that loved her unconditionally, and a child who looked to her as a mother. In that moment, she realized that she was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had gained: love, trust, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The girl, once abandoned in a sack to die, had found her place in the world. She was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a mother, a protector, and a cherished part of a new family. And in that realization, she understood the true power of belonging, the ability to heal, to love, and to create a life built not on fear or loss, but on hope, resilience, and the enduring